So we've allowed for some time to dry, and I changed out the grip. So we have our newer Wrathcore holder, and I actually put on the little guard so we can move it around, hold the piece upside down as we're going to go through and do our brushwork. And since we're going to be doing this with, look at that, while I was handling it, metal pieces are the worst. Take all the best care. Still handle it too soon and rub a little bit of primer off. It's okay. If we did the right things, it'll come through in the end. So the first thing we're going to look at is what kind of brush we're going to use. I like using a bigger brush. Here we get two size 4s, one a newer Winsor Newton Series 7 and an older Raphael 8404. You can see all the paint that's built up in my Raphael here. It's quite a bit more worn, well used. I've cleaned it many times, so you can also see that the points are not the same. And the reason for that is just wear. You know, I've abused this one so much, it's just never going to have that same point, because they file down as you use them. Point back on it. And so I've just kind of worn away that good fine tip over the months of painting with it. A lot of hours. So we're going to use this one for our base coats, and we're going to save a brush like this for later on in the process. It's not uncommon to use a synthetic kind of cheap beat up brush for these initial layers as well. A lot of people like to do that. But first, let's look at the kind of browns we're going to use for our leather. I'm just going to get a couple different options here. So darker browns. This one's got kind of like a neutral. This is a P3 paint from Privateer Press. Another good dark base, has a lot more red in it, is the Rhinox Hide from Citadel. I think either of these make good neutral, darker browns. I think for this guy, because we're going to be using some fun colors, something that's a little more orangey would be nice. Scrag Brown from Citadel, Bloodstone from P3. You can see they're very similar oranges in them. You don't have to pay too much care to the brand. The Scrag Brown is a little bit more orangey. This one's a little bit more red. But they're very similar. What you want to pay attention to is the kind of pigments that they use to make the brown, because something with its orange could really be highlighted very nically, with a brown that's got a lot of yellow in it, or any ochre brown like the Baylor. So Bloodstone and Baylor Brown make a nice yellow, but still quite warm red. Here we're going to get even more orangey yellow if we use the Scrag. A lot of things to play with. But you can also highlight them with some off-whites. I got a Citadel and a Privateer paint that are pretty similar to the Menoth White base and the Screaming Skull. The Menoth White has a lot more yellow in it. That could be desirable or not. But the Menoth White highlight is very similar to Ivory with a bit more yellow. So depending on what you're playing with, you can use these different brands to achieve different looks. I think for this particular brown, I'm going to use the Rhinox Hide from Citadel as my shadow color. And I'm going to use the Bloodstone as our mid, and the well-loved, well airbrush abused Baylor Brown as our more highlighted color. I think we make a nice blend between these three over here on our wet palette. And then we might take our highlights a little bit further and our shadows a little bit further. So to do that, I'm actually going to use some purple. I don't know what this is going to look like yet, but I'm going to play around with some beaten purple. I don't know if it's going to be ideal or not, so I may desaturate a little bit of red. We'll play around, we'll see what it looks like when we get it on there. And then we'll use some of our Menoth White base to make it even brighter highlight. So let's just start with that real quick. Again, we're just going to take our older, well-loved brush, get a little bit of paint out. So just going to be working a blend. Just going to start with a pretty liberal amount of paint. We'll take our next paint. This orangey brown, I know that because the Rhinoxide has red in it, we take our red brown here and then we mix them together. We're going to get a nice middle tone here. Just going to rinse out a little of that Rhinoxide because it can be quite strong. Take a little bit more of this that I know doesn't have any of that previous color in it to put down next. Since we're not using these other two, we'll get them out of the way. And come through their Baylor Brown. This is just a lovely ochre color. In the middle, we're going to mix up a nice, richer orange. Now let's experiment with that purple. Let's see what we get when we add this into our Rhinoxide. I've used purples plenty of times with the Rhinoxide, but never this one. It's so vibrant, I think it might just be a lot of fun. And if it's wrong, what have we harmed? Used up a little bit of our parchment paper, right? Like, it's the only downside, which can't be too bad. Take a look here on some paper towel. This is a really nice desaturated mess we have. I actually think I didn't get enough of this Rhinoxide out initially, so we're gonna get a little bit more. It'll allow us to mix this up a little bit better without really losing all of our Rhinoxide. Yeah, now we have, whoop, there we go, focus up on the screen. We have a nice, very, very dark color. So let's bring our model back and let's try to take a look at what we've done here. We've got our purpley color into our Rhinoxide, Rhinoxide into our reddish brown, transition into yellow, into pure yellow, and eventually we may even work a little bit of white into this to make a brighter highlight. I think what we can do initially is just start to lay in these shadows. And I'm going to overpaint and I'm going to be sloppy. It's going to be fun, I think. So the only thing that I want to be careful of is that the Rhinoxide and our Baylor Brown do not play well together. They don't like each other. I've used them before. The pigments, they turn gray. There's something bad there. But with our neutral tone, I know that they play okay together. Just like two siblings that can talk because they get along, and two that don't. So as we go through this process, we're just putting our, truly we're not working with a highlight, we're using mid-tone and shadow to mix our things up. We're just kind of wet on wet blending this without too much care. Kind of following our highlight. I'm only rinsing the brush out because I'm about to grab some of our brighter colors. I'll start sketching this in. You see how the paint went on a little bit thinly? I didn't get all the water out of my paintbrush, and that's what caused that. Just identifying that and drying it off. We'll let that dry a little bit more before we come back to it. Just working our way around the colors, putting our darker colors where we have darker colors from our pre-shade, And our brighter colors in to where we have brighter. Here I let a little bit dry too soon, so I'm actually just going to work that shadow a little bit higher. Then we come back through, we'll feather it out a little bit. I think in that way we can conceal that little mistake. And but here we're going to work a little bit shadow underneath our collar, because I think we need some. We might even take a little bit of our darkest tone with that purple. Just kind of pack that down in there. I'll grab a little bit more of that. I don't think I really packed in much change. When in doubt, be persistent. Now, with our brighter colors, just going to start feathering this out a little bit further down. The ripples. Since that little mistake I made is less visible now through the layers. And get a nice looking shadow down here as well. Alright, that's not too bad. Let's not forget about the front of the piece. Down here. We're going to overpaint his legs a bit, but we're still early enough. I don't feel like we're going to cause any problems by doing so. Grab our next tone. Just kind of push that color back. Paint in this direction now to push it down. As we work our way further up the model, continue to add bits of our brighter colors. And back in there, we probably want, as it always should be, a bit of shadow. Same shadow we just packed into the top, and now grabbing our mid-tone. Don't mind while I slap some paint on the edge of the sword because I'm working possibly in a bit too much of a hurry. For here on the shadow side, I'll just continue up with that. Rinse out my brush. Make sure this time I don't come back at it with a brush load of water like I did the first time. Now for me, I think that's just a bit too bright for what we're trying to do, because we're on the other side of the hat. So I'm going to add a little bit more of a shadow color and just kind of feather that in. Let's see if we're getting any better result. Better, but not quite there just yet. Just grab a little bit more of our mixture. And just make sure I don't have too much paint on the brush for how small this piece is. Two pieces of detail here. One, we want to have enough paint on our brush to do our wet blend. I think that's critical. We need to be using a big enough brush to accomplish it. This is the other piece. And then make sure you have, you're not working with paint that's too close to drying, because that'll cause you problems. You got to make sure that the pigments on the paint get along. That's pretty much it. nuance to this technique. Just packing our darkest shadow back in there. Remember, the Baylor and that color don't get along so well. So I'm gonna clean up my brush before just laying that color right beside. I don't really love the way that looks, so I'll grab a little bit more of that orangey color. Oh yeah. So, despite my best attempt, don't love the look of that, so we'll just cover it up with the shadow again. We'll come back in the whole way with the orange. I think the orange is just the right vibe for this piece. Because that's turning out to be the case, I think maybe we'll do a lot of purples. Might be a nice look. Here, coming back through a little bit of our orange. Just using my finger to tap in little bits of area and texture. Grabbing more of our yellow now. Go in there. Make sure my thumb, move that onto the canvas, you can see just mixing these two together, and then on my thumb here, making sure that I have mixture and consistency where I want it. I'm using my hand to kind of speed up the drying process, but also kind of steal away some of the paint so it's not drying uniformly. I think I'm not going to tidy that up too much over there. I think we're going to leave that for now. Reason being, I want to put more shadow on that side. Just like I'm adding highlights very selectively, somewhat sketchily. That'll make a nice looking wear. This is a good template to follow as we go through and try to detail out the piece. And solid right there. That's what I initially thought I was going to accomplish when I came up here with the that first blend, and it just didn't look right. Sometimes you just need a layer to start helping it make sense. And that's what got us here. And so that highlight color out of here. I'm going to fix the other side of the hat. So it won't be our darkest shadow, but it will be something with a bit of that purple. Just like we tapped in the highlights, now we're going to tap in the shadows. Here much more selectively. Kind of reclaiming some of these areas. Could probably step down in the brush size here, but whatever you're comfortable with. I tend to want to use just the biggest brush I'm capable of using for the scenario because it holds more paint, which means I don't have to get more paint, and I'm less likely to want to walk away and do something else for a little bit. Keeps me in the painting mood. There's a couple of different ways to do this. Right now we're adding texture, but in a minute I think we're gonna actually break out another brush and we'll do a little two brush blending. It's a really fun way to add texture to a piece. Just gonna further saturate these colors here underneath the collar. All right, we'll let this dry. Give me some time to think about the state of the piece. We'll come back at it. Not looking too bad at all.